Today we're here to talk about cross-platform progressive web apps. I know that's a bit of a word salad, but we'll get into a lot of that stuff in the next few slides. I'd just like to say that I'm really honored that so many of you have shown up for this. Brian LaRue, a good friend of mine, is doing a talk on serverless right now in another room, so if I could, I'd be in that room right now, but I can't. So I'm glad that some of you showed up for this. Anyway, my name is Simon MacDonald. I work for Adobe. That's the last time I'll mention that. I just have to mention it in order to get the little check mark so that I can verify this as a day off. Anyway, what I do there, though, is I'm a developer advocate. And really what that means is I go out and I talk to developers, I learn about their problems, I try to figure out how we can make Adobe products better. So I need your feedback, so please come talk to me afterwards, and I would love to get this feedback to our product team so they can ignore both of us. If you ever need to get in touch with me, probably the easiest way to do it is via Twitter, which I'm at MacDonald, which is MacDonald Simon Thomas. It was my Unix user ID from a million years ago, and amazingly enough, it's available on every social network everywhere. All right, but enough about me, because apparently I have 30 minutes to do this talk that I usually take 45 to do, so it's okay. I'm a Cape Bretoner. I can talk super fast. So what is a progressive web app? So let's start with the definition of that. Progressive web apps use modern web technologies and capabilities to deliver an app-like experience. That's pretty cool. And basically, they're evolving from web pages and browser tabs to give you this kind of immersive, top-level, experience, but all maintaining the web's low friction at every moment. So what I'm really trying to say is they're just web pages. That's all they are. It's not really that fancy. That's the only thing that they are. So if the one and only thing you take away from this talk today is that progressive web apps is just a really good marketing term that Google came up to, and you shouldn't be intimidated at all to start getting into them. And you don't have to implement every feature that Google or other vendors have on their checkboxes for progressive web apps. The whole part of it is they're progressive. You can start and enhance things a little bit over time. And in fact, the whole term PWA is starting to kind of burn off in the different marketing things. I mean, 3 years ago, progressive web apps was all over the place in conferences. 2 years ago, all pretty big. This year, not so much. It's all about serverless now, and which is, again, thank you all for getting tired with serverless and showing up here for this talk. So what are progressive web apps? What differentiates a progressive web app from a regular web page? Well, as I said, they're progressive. And again, I'm sorry if I got to include your favorite browser logo in here. I really just got tired after putting 5 of them up. But basically what we're trying to do is to make sure that regardless of the browser that the user is using in order to view your web application, it should work. It doesn't have to support all of the same functionality in every browser, which is where the progressive enhancement comes in. But at least there should be a base amount of functionality. And then, of course, they should all be responsive. It shouldn't matter if somebody is coming into your web app and they're using a phone or a tablet, or perhaps like some new multimodal interface that's coming out that deals with speech recognition. Your interface should adapt to that. And by using responsive design techniques, it's a really good way to do it. I got a chance to see Ethan Marcotte talk last week, and that was like a good checkbox for me, life goal. Ethan is the guy who originally coined the term responsive web design. And he wrote a small book from a book apart called, guess this, Responsive Web Design. And it was probably the best $9 I ever spent, because until that point in time, I didn't really grok the concept, but he lays it out so succinctly in a very short book that I totally recommend it. Also, I really suck at CSS, so being able to have somebody lay this out for me was beautiful. As well, PWA should be connectivity independent. You want to warn your users when they're offline. And you also want to make sure that any interactions that happen when they're offline are queued up to be sent at a later date. So with progressive web apps, you can use service workers and the background sync API in order to do that. Now, not all browsers support that, but again, you'll have back-offs in order to figure out when you can use the service workers and when to use other methods. They should look app-like. So it should feel like an app when the user is interacting with it, because you're going to separate your application shell, which is the Chrome, the buttons, the toolbars, all those sorts of fun things, from the actual content of the application itself. Now we're in Canada, so I don't really feel like I need to explain what hockey skates are, but I've been in other countries. They're like, what is that a picture of? It's It's kind of shocking. Anyway, so you basically want to be able to cache that application shell and then download the content whenever fresh content comes up. But at the same time, you can do things like cache the content so that if you're offline, at least people can read, I don't know, the old tweets instead of having to get that, the fail whale or something like that. Now, you want to make sure that your application is safe. So besides wanting to secure the communication so that your users don't get a man-in-the-middle attack, you want to be able to make sure that your web app is running over HTTPS because a lot of the new browser APIs only work over HTTPS. So now I'm going to do this little thing I like to call HTTP shaming. Who here is running a website that is still HTTP only? It's just a hands? Okay, I only saw one hand, so there's only one truthful person in this entire audience. I can't really see your face, but kudos to you. Yeah, do yourself a favor. If you haven't gotten into getting a HTTPS certificate for your website, just go do it. Let's Encrypt is a really good and easy way to get started with that. And if that doesn't convince you, Google is starting to downrank things that are not served over HTTPS. So if you want that wonderful SEO juice, you want to be over HTTPS. All right, they should be re-engageable. I could talk for a good 40 minutes about push notifications, so I'm not going to do that today. What I would suggest to you is if you think you need push notifications in your web app, you don't, okay? They're a bad idea in most cases, and anytime your boss comes in and says, hey, I want to add push notifications to this web application, really push back. In a lot of cases, they just add noise to your web application. They don't provide a lot of benefit. And please do not be that person that as soon as I load up your web app, it asks, hey, can I send you push notifications? No, you can't. I don't know what you're going to do for me. So if you absolutely are being pressured into adding push notifications to your web app, prove the value of your application first before you start asking to send push notifications to your users. You'll get a lot better opt-in rate at that point in time. If you do want to see a talk on push notifications in the web, look for one, Fluent Conference, Olga Petrova. She did a fantastic 40-minute talk on push notifications and how they're different between Mozilla, Chrome, and Safari. All right, and again, push notifications only work on HTTPS, so that's another one of those things that you want to make sure your site is running on HTTPS for. Now, they're installable. Being able to install the applications is kind of a big problem because when it comes to things now, if you say like, oh, I've got this really great app, and you tell your friend the name of the app, and they go and they search in the App Store, they're going to find like probably 500 different apps with exactly the same name. So it's really a problem in the application store. Being able to just share a URL in order to get people using your application is huge. So by reducing the friction of installing your application, by removing these steps, is another good way to make sure that people don't abandon using of your app. Now, there was a study by ComScore a while ago, and they found that at every step, you lose 20% of your users when it comes to getting an app onto the phone. So if you have 1,000 users that are interested in your application, 800 of them go find it in the App Store. Then 640 will install it. 512 will accept the permissions dialog, especially back when Android gave you that list of like 500 permissions. Then 410 will actually wait for the damn thing to download. And then from there, 327 will install. And finally, the people who actually launch your app just one time, you'll be down to 262. So we started with 1,000. We're down to 262. We've lost almost 74% of the users that were interested in our application. So a lot of marketing effort goes into getting your app out there, and you're losing a lot of them along the way if you're determining that only I'm going to be available in the App Store or the Play Store. So when it comes to installing the application for PWA, you can see here that there is a URL bar at the top of it, but you will get this dialog for add to home screen, which we'll talk about a little bit later because some of it is going away. But if the user decides that they're going to do add to home screen, then you'll have this nice icon on your home screen of your phone. And the next time you start it from the home screen, you'll notice in this case, the URL bar has completely gone away. So we'll talk when we get into the manifest.json about how you can control the look and feel of your PWA when started from the desktop, but that's just one quick example. then, of course, as I just mentioned a moment ago, you want to make sure your application is linkable. So in order for people to be able to become marketers, you can turn users into marketers, you just want to have a very simple way for them to share things, and that is just by the URL, which is, we've been using those since 1995 or so, so yeah, they work pretty well. So it's a lot easier for people to be able to share and pick up your app that way. And then it comes to discoverability. So you might ask yourself, like, how do people find my web application if I'm not in an app store somewhere? Well, by using this thing called manifest.json, which you will link to in your application, that will allow a lot of search engines like Google and Microsoft to be able to find your app and know that it is an application, and they can start promoting it internally. So I think it's only inevitable that search engines will give priority to progressive web apps in the not too distant future. And in fact, as of right now, I think Bing is crawling the web for progressive web applications and just directly adding them to the Windows 10 store. So you don't even have to do anything to get your app showing up in Windows 10 store. So what I was saying is that it all starts with a manifest.json. So all you really need to do to get started with progressive web apps, you don't even have to implement any code at this point in time. All you need is that one link tag in your HTML pointing to a JSON file. And that JSON file looks like this. So as you can see, that's not a lot of lines, so it won't take you terribly long to at least start using some of the functionality of progressive web apps. So if we quickly go through what some of those things do, you can see here that the short name, that's actually the name that shows up on the desktop. You don't want it to be any more than 8 to 12 characters. Any more than that, it'll get truncated, it won't look quite right on the desktop. And then, of course, we have the actual name of your application. That's where you can go a lot longer. That'll show up in this install dialog. It'll show up in a lot of the app stores. So you can kind of make it more descriptive at that point in time. And then, of course, we have the start URL. So this is the URL when you do an add to home screen and somebody is launching your application from their home screen. So when they click on that icon, that's the entry point into your application. And in this case, it's index.html. Pretty obvious. Now you may ask yourself a question, how do I tell the difference between somebody coming to my web application from the internet versus somebody that's loading it from cache on their device? Well, one way that you can do it is using this media query, and this will figure out whether or not your application was started from the home screen or not. So what you can see there is when it's doing the media match, it's looking for the display mode equal to standalone. So when you're starting a progressive web app, you can give it 4 different modes, which we'll talk about in a future slide. And in this particular one, I was using standalone, so I can see that, hey, if this is in standalone mode, I know it's a progressive web app. All of that work I did going to build a progressive web app, people are actually using it. So you can track the analytics slightly different that way. See, a few folks are trying to take pictures, but don't worry, the slides will be available. All right, so this is what I was talking about when it comes to the display mode. So what we have right here is standalone. So when you come into it via the web, you see the URL bar, but if I start it from the home screen, the URL bar goes away. So standalone basically feels like a regular native application. It has the status bar, it doesn't have the URL bar, it doesn't have any kind of Chrome for being able to go back and forth in the web browser, even though it really is a web browser that's happening right here. Now, if you're writing a game, you can change the mode to full screen, and what that'll do is it'll get rid of the status bar, so you'll have the entire canvas in order to be able to write your game. There's 2 other modes. One is minimal UI, which gives you a minimal set of elements for you to be able to go back and forth in the web page. Or there's browser, and browser looks exactly like a browser, so I don't know why you'd want to use that one, but sure, the option is there, full completeness. All right. We have the background color. That is just a hint to the browser. So at least on Chrome, what happens is when you start up the application from the home screen, it'll create a splash screen on the fly for you. So it'll take one of your icons, it'll take the name, and it'll take the background color. And what we're doing here is we're basically saying, like, most of my application, the background is going to be white. So that'll kind of keep you from having that nasty flash for when the splash screen goes away and the application starts. It's not as jarring to the user. So back in the old days, you would used to like open a new tab or like travel to another web page, and the first thing that would happen is the entire screen would go gray because that was what Mosaic, yeah, I'm not old, that's what Mosaic would actually show you is a gray background. Then it would load the HTML, load the CSS, figure out what the background color or the tiled image as we used to do in the old days. And that would give you that kind of nasty flash that was kind of disconcerting to users. By using the background color as a hint, you can make it a little nicer for your users. And as well, we have the theme color. So when it comes to the theme color, that's the attribute to tell it to match the style of my application's like title bar or Chrome or whatever else with the status bar. So it's a hint there that says, hey, color the URL bar the same color, and then through some magic, it's going to figure out that a complementary color to make the status bar a little bit darker, as you can see here. So that's all happening for you automatically. And then, of course, we have icons, and the icons are used all over the place. So they're going to be used in your splash screen, they're going to be used in your add to home screen, and of course, what I had said earlier, when you do the home screen icon itself, you're going to have that there. Now, in this particular version of the manifest, because I didn't want it falling off the end of the page here, I'm only using two different size icons, 192 by 192 and 512 by 512. Those are pretty good defaults, but you can add a lot of different icons in this array so that you can support all sorts of different phone resolutions, so that you have really unbounded at that point in time. But at a minimum, those are the ones that you kind of want to use. And again, you see that, that fun little install dialog that's popping up there? Again, that's kind of an anti-pattern. A little bit of it is going away. And one way that you can actually get a bit more control over that is that in your application, if you listen for the event before install prompt, you can capture that event and prevent it from happening. So you can prevent that dialog from popping up, because just like push notifications asking for your permission to do something, unless the user knows why this is a good idea, they're probably not going to actually add your app to the home screen. And then by dismissing that dialog, it never shows up again. So by being able to capture this event, it allows you to build your own UI, explain to the user why saying yes to this is a good idea. And then what you're able to do is, after everything is said and done, you call the prompt command, which then shows that dialog for you. So that's kind of the way that things were. As of Chrome 68, that big add to home screen dialog has gone away, and it's a much thinner just kind of tooltip now. And the small tooltip is there, and if you click on it, then there's a modal dialog. And in future, there's going to be this Omni install box that they're still working on. So the things around the add to home screen dialogs are kind of evolving as we speak. All right, drink. I forget to do that sometimes. All right, so I alluded to this earlier, and I was talking about the app shell architecture. So here's an image that I've just completely stolen from Google. It was Adi Osmani's slides. I think it does a really good job of capturing it. And so what we want to do is have anything in our application shell, our title bar, our menus, all of that fun stuff, we want to be able to cache that so that the first time that somebody comes into your web page, they're going to load that from the internet, but then that'll be saved offline for you to use frequently from that point forward. And then really only populate the dynamic parts like the cat pictures, because everybody loves cat pictures, it's the internet. That stuff is loaded dynamically. Now, there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. For single page apps, there's a lot of different options. Okay, so we have Polymer, Vue, Preact, React, Angular, and if you don't see your favorite framework, that is because I hate you personally, and I didn't want to add it on there. No, it's true. If you want to shoot for maximum headroom when it comes to building a progressive web app, I'm kind of leaning more towards Preact and Vue at this point in time. That is not saying anything bad about those other toolkits. In fact, I use React a lot. But when it comes to just deploying the least amount of code possible, Preact is a fantastic tool. So if you have users that have very low bandwidth problems, Preact's the way to go. So again, I apologize if your favorite framework is not shown there. So let's get into caching, because I talked a lot about having to cache the Chrome of your application. How does that actually work? Well, that's through a technology called service workers. Now, I think a lot of people have heard about service workers already, but All it really is it's a script that your browser runs in the background that is completely separate from your web page. So the way that JavaScript works in your browser and your web application is there's only one thread. So if you want to offload any of that stuff to a separate thread, if you have web workers, you can do that, but in the most cases, your application is single-threaded. Having a service worker, which is a special kind of web worker, you can offload that kind of stuff to another thread, makes your application more performant. And as well, in a lot of cases, service workers can do a bunch of things for you, but most commonly they're used to cache information for use offline. Now, let's take a quick run through a typical service worker. In this case, in our application, we're just going to check to see if service worker exists in Navigator. If it does, then we'll go ahead and load it. If it doesn't exist, then our application just performs as normal. It doesn't get any of the benefits of service workers, but that's okay, because the P in Progressive Web Apps stands for progressive. All right. So the actual code of the service worker looks a little bit like this. I like to set up things with a cache version and a cache list. In this contrived example, we're only caching 3 files, which is fine. But basically what happens is when the install event of the service worker gets fired, it's going to wait until it loops through that entire list of files to cache and save them offline. And then when it's finished, it will end the script, and the service worker will go to bed. So that's kind of one of the nice things about service workers is they will run until completion and then go back to sleep. So it doesn't matter, you're not going to add a whole bunch of overhead to your users. They're not going to have like millions of service workers running in the background, because once the service worker is done, it's going to go back to sleep. It'll be suspended by the browser itself. So here we are. We have all of these files cached. Now, there's another phase. It's called the activation stage of the service worker lifecycle. So after everything's installed, it knows to go ahead and say to activate this service worker so it's ready to be used by the browser. And in this case, something that a lot of people sometimes that's a really bad sentence. I should try that again. Forget it. All right, so what you want to do in this particular case when we have the activation is make sure that you clean up your old caches. So if you're not uniquely identifying all of your HTML, CSS, JavaScript, fun stuff with different hashes in order to make sure that they're unique file names, if you cache index.html in version 1 of your service worker, and then cache index.html in version 2 of your service worker without cleaning it up, your users will forever get the index.html in version 1. So that can be really aggravating when you're even developing locally. So anytime that you're coming up with a new version of your cache, it's a really good idea to invalidate the previous cache. And the nice thing is you can have as many different caches as you want. You may want to have a cache for your HTML. You might have another one for your CSS, your JavaScript. You can cache individual images that you've downloaded off the internet separately. So you can do things like this where you separate some of the content that the user downloads from the actual application code itself. So at least this way you can keep that stuff around and still clean up your last version of your application. That probably didn't make a lot of sense. Awesome. And then we get into fetching, and this is what service workers are used for a lot, and that's basically acting as an intermediate layer between the browser and the internet. So the browser will basically say to the service worker, I want you to fetch this URL, and then we're going to do some matching. We're going to figure out whether or not that URL actually exists in the cache. So the fun thing about the cache matching algorithm is it'll match things exactly. So if you have a URL that you changed lately with a different parameter at the end of it, if that's not cached exactly the same, you will not find it. So you'll have to kind of think about that. So don't make it index.html, comma 1 or comma 2. You'll basically need to match exactly the URL. If not, you'll just completely miss it. So, man, a lot of this stuff looks like pretty boilerplate code, and also kind of confusing code, and it really is. I really recommend that you don't write your own service workers. It's not a good idea. You can make a lot of mistakes and basically shoot yourself in the foot with a bazooka. It's not fun. So Google has this wonderful tool called Workbox, which, if you're familiar with like Node and Express routing, it allows you to be able to take a look at the different routes and specify how things should be cached. And then, of course, there's plugins for Webpack, Gulp, and NPM so that you can integrate it into your already existing build chain. Now, another thing, people were very excited with service workers initially. They were added to all of the platforms. But right now, React CLI doesn't add service workers by default. The Angular CEI took it out as well. We're finding that a lot of times when you're building locally, that service workers are actually an impediment because of the caching issues that I was alluding to earlier. So sometimes they're just a little bit better to have them in production. All right. And then, of course, there's another great tool. It's called Lighthouse. So it was a Chrome extension that is actually built into Chrome. And what it allows you to do is to run basically a test suite against your progressive web app in order to find out how well it scores. In this particular case, I did not do too good, but it gives you a report that you can go through and figure out, what I need to change. And in this case, I went and I changed a bunch of different things. I got a much better score. Now, here's a pro tip. Run this in incognito mode, turn off any extensions. Sometimes the extensions that you have in your browser can really screw up Lighthouse. It's not great. So, all of this makes perfect sense when it comes to, Chrome, Firefox, and Internet Explorer. But let's kind of address the elephant in the room, the cross-platformness. There's one major platform that's missing. Oh, I went the wrong way. Wow, stepped on that joke. All right, Apple. So their support for progressive web apps is not super great. Now, they didn't really support it that well at all until iOS 11.3, where they added a lot of functionality. So that's where they've added support for manifest.json, which was fantastic. So in the old days, you didn't specify the short name of in the manifest.json. In pre-iOS 11.3, you had to put in this meta tag. All right, cool. So if you don't actually put in this meta tag, when somebody does an add to home screen in iOS, your app shows up as favorites. So definitely add this meta tag in. It's very important. So again, that's supported in iOS 11.3. And then, of course, we have our standalone mode. So that's not really that well supported in iOS at this point in time. What you were able to do in the past is put in this meta tag to say that it is web app capable, and then things would start to work, magically for you. It's great. So at least the standalone option is supported in 11.3, but a lot of the other modes are not quite supported yet. And then when it comes to the theme color, you don't have a lot of choice for theme color. Basically, you had black translucent, and I forget what the other one was, and default, yeah, so I forget what default gives you. But basically, this allows you some slight control over what the status bar is going to look like. And of course, black and black translucent have been deprecated, so default is the only option now. And then when it comes to icons, a lot of the icons, if you do not actually support these link tags in your index.html, what will actually happen is that iOS will take a screenshot of your app and use that as the icon. So just imagine your app, screenshot, then shrunk down into one of those little tiny icons. And then, of course, when you pair that to the fact that it's called favorites because you forgot to put in a short name, no one's going to ever find your app on their desktop, so it's going to be pretty ridiculous. So this kind of support is still needed in iOS, and of course, you'll definitely want to add that icon in. Another tip is that on Android, they use square icons, and Android is like circular icons, and iOS is square icons, so you actually have to have different icons for the different platforms as well. And then when it comes to the splash screen, there's another link that you can add in order to provide a splash screen for your application as well. So again, that is still needed in iOS 11.3. There's no splash screen support yet. So when you do all of that fun stuff, things start to look a little bit better on Apple. So that's pretty great. Things are moving in the right direction, right? Nope. So iOS 11 breaks the file input tag, breaks the integration with the camera, and there's no support for get user media. I mean, why would your application need, access to the camera? Like, no one ever uses a camera in an app these days. Oh, wait, they use it for absolutely everything. So the workaround is you go in and you remove that meta tag to tell it is web app capable. So they're kind of fighting with each other here. You tell it it's web app capable, so it'll have progressive web app-like functionality. You do that, you lose progressive web app-like functionality. I don't know what to tell you. Although, you're probably sitting here, 11.3, that was a long time ago. What about iOS 12? I'm sure that fixed a lot of stuff. Nope, not at all. Solved one bug, and one bug only. So now without the meta tag, at least the status bar won't be invisible. So progress? I don't know. So yeah, things are slowly coming along. And when it comes to service workers, they weren't supported in Safari, but what we're seeing is now they are coming into Safari, which is great. Everything is moving in the right direction. We are all very excited about service workers in Safari. I set you up again because not so fast. They are not always persistent. I mean, why would you want a service worker to be persistent, right? So you can read all of that fun thing. But basically what it means is that iOS at any point in time may decide to just delete all of your service worker caches for you. So the user comes in, clicks on your home screen button, and they expect everything to be there. Nope, not there anymore. Isn't that awesome? All right. And then, of course, it has other weird behavior. Anytime you leave your progressive web app and come back into it, it completely restarts. That's great, right? So if your app needs OAuth, yeah, it just won't work. Because you'll start the app, you'll fill in the things, you go to the OAuth, it'll come back, your app's restarted, and you talk about recursion at that point in time. It's great fun. And there's other missing features. For instance, you can't do push notifications in the service worker. You can't do background sync in the service worker. You can't really do background code execution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, which all leads me to I'm kind of embarrassed right now. I've been giving this talk for a while, and I thought that this would be the perfect time, slightly after iOS 12, I'd be able to get up here and tell you all the new wonderful things that iOS 12 fixed. I can't. But what does that all mean? Personally, I would listen to Tom Dale on this one. And if you don't know Tom, he is the creator of Ember, if I'm not mistaken, and a really smart and generous guy. And he says, always bet on the web. And that's really what I've been doing for my entire career. Always betting on the web because it's continuously moving forward. It's continuously getting better. So even though things are not perfect on the iOS side of things, I still suggest that you look into progressive web apps and start adding that kind of functionality to your applications. So that's all that I've got. I think I've gone a couple of minutes over, but I will be around for questions if anybody needs it. Thanks.